Hey, welcome. It's great to imagine you out there. I can't see you, but thinking of you makes my heart smile. My name is Jonathan Foust. Thank you for making the time to be here. I will be leading the following meditation and talk. And before we begin, I want to thank our mindful movement teacher for today, and also thank you to our mindful dialogue leaders after this session. If you are interested in having a whole experience ranging from mindful movement, that starts at 6:30 Eastern Standard Time. That'll take you right up to 7:30 Eastern Standard Time for the meditation, and that'll take you right up to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the talk. And then afterward, you can join Ray Manioki and Tara Cassidy for Mindful Dialogue, an opportunity to share about your practice, to share about the talk if you like. It's kind of a wide open time just for connection. If you want those links to those Zoom sessions before and after this, you can go to my Facebook page or you can go to my website. None of this would happen without our amazing producers, Glenn Harrison and Leo Gimo. Thank you so much. And a big thank you and acknowledgement to the Insight Meditation Community of Washington for hosting this event. And thank you to my friends for the Unitarian Universalist Church of Arlington, which had been the host of Monday night before we moved online. A couple other quick things just to let you know there is a mailing list you can sign up for. Monthly, I send out a summary of talks, resources for your practice, and my best photography for the month. And there's also a weekly, if you like, which gives you an update of what's happening. All of my talks are available online. They're available through all the usual outlets. And this couldn't happen without your support. Everything here is offered freely. I receive no direct compensation here. If you feel inspired to make a donation to support this whole thing here, deeply, deeply appreciated. I'm really grateful to be able to share these practices with so many people from all over the planet. And I'm really, really glad to be here. Finally, in the realm of shameless self-promotion, on May 21st, a Saturday, I'm leading a day-long retreat online. It's on the topic of inquiry, and the title is These Questions Can Change Your Life. It's about the power, kind of the art and the science of asking yourself the deep questions and opening up that internal space by changing your state to receive more information. To tap into intuition, to open to new possibilities. So please feel free to join in. It'd be great to have you there. So on that note, we are going to move into our meditation. If you like, you can close your eyes. And you might want to adjust your posture in any way that feels good for you. Feel free to shift a little bit from side to side. Feel free to reach your arms up overhead. Feel free to screech or bellow. It's kind of a wide open space here as you kind of settle in for your practice. You might take a few moments just to kind of relax and just sense what's here. Notice the quality of presence. Notice if you can sense what we call the observer or the witness, this quality of non-judging awareness right now. What are you noticing right now? You may find it helpful as a way of gathering your attention to begin to slow down your breath. A technique that some people like, I certainly do, is to count the breath, counting in slowly on the inhalation to 4 or 5, and then gliding right into the exhalation to the count of 4 or 5. And just for a few rounds of breath, notice how intimately you can feel the breath inside as you notice and count and feel. You may well notice that your mind will kind of wander off into commentary. this is the practice. It's about noticing when your mind wanders, noticing what it's like to just re-engage. And for the next 3 breaths, you might just sense how intimately can you feel the breath on the inside. And now, if you would, if it feels right for you, release all control of the breath and let your breath be free-flowing, effortless. And notice where you feel the breath on the inside. How easily can you allow the body just to breathe by itself? One helpful anchor or doorway back to the here and now is this sense of the breath. You might just take a few moments to explore what it's like to feel the breath in your belly. Can you sense about an inch or two below your navel and in toward the center? How much can you relax and feel the subtlety of the breath here deep in the belly? You might now just shift your attention to the sense of the breath in the nostrils. Yeah, just sensing the breath in the nostrils and perhaps up to the septum. And again, just for the next few rounds of breath, how subtly can you feel the breath right here? Notice now if you can generalize your sense of the breath and just kind of sense the whole body breathing. Feel the breath in the lungs. Feel the breath at the collarbones, the sense of the breath flowing up through the trachea. A generalized sense of the body breathing all by itself. And you might like to explore for a few rounds of breath here what it's like to detect the breath outside your body rather than inside your body. And here it's very, very subtle. But if you sense just below the nostrils, can you detect the sense of the breath on the upper lip, just below the nostrils? If you elect to use the breath as your anchor, you might explore one of these possible approaches. The belly, the nostrils, the septum, the general sense of the breath, or perhaps even the sense of the breath just below the nostrils outside the body. But another anchor you might explore is the sounds, and you might just take a moment to relax and just notice all the sounds around you. Notice the sounds are happening in real time, and they're utterly beyond your control, but a sense of just noticing the sounds as they happen. Just notice the inner effect of sound as your primary anchor. Exploring another anchor here as you explore what it's like now to soften and relax the palms of your hands. Can you soften and relax your thumbs? Can you soften and relax your fingers? And if you relax and soften here, sensing the volume of the hands, thumbs, and fingers, how subtly might you detect any sense of sensation or movement? Any sense of subtle energy or tingling or vibration or pulse? Any one of these approaches of breath or sound or the feeling in the palms can be this amazing way of re-engaging into the here and now, directly through the body. And yet another approach. As I mentioned, a body part. Let your attention move to that part of the body, not trying to make anything happen, but to experience it from the inside. Sensing the crown of the head and the scalp. The forehead and temples. The muscles around the eyes. The muscles of the face. The inside of the mouth. The tongue and the lips. And the back of the head and the base of the skull. The back of the neck and the tops of the shoulders. Sensing from the inside out. The arms. The palms. The thumbs and fingers and backs of the hands. The throat. The lungs and the heart. The diaphragm and the rib cage. the lower back, the buttocks and the floor of the pelvis, the belly, the left hip joint, the right hip joint, the legs, the tops of the feet and the toes, the soles of the feet and the heels. Is there anything right now that could relax or soften inside? And from this place of deepening and softening, from this sense of relaxed awareness, you might bring your attention to an anchor, to the breath or sound, felt sense in the palms, or maybe even to do your own body scan. And you might explore what it's like to blend both deep relaxation with concentration and awareness. When the mind naturally wanders, you can smile, acknowledge the movement of the mind, and then gently re-engage. At any point, you can inquire, what could soften right now? How intimately can I experience my anchor from the inside? As you again and again relax and redirect your attention to your anchor or your point of concentration, you may notice there's a natural awareness of your point of concentration, that is to say, the breath or sound or feeling or scanning. And also maybe a heightened awareness of the periphery, a sense of the background. Utterly natural. And you might explore this natural broadening and widening of attention, of awareness. Is it possible to be both present to your anchor and at the same time opening your attention to flow, to the stream of your experience? You may notice that this can be dramatically facilitated by relaxing even more. Sensing this lens of the witness or the observer. Letting things be. Noticing what's changing. What is passing across the screen of your awareness right now? Can you allow it? Can you open to the flow of your experience? Relaxed, at the same time alert. In these remaining 5 minutes or so, let's review some elements of the practice. One element is this sense of deep, deep relaxation and softening. You might gently scan through the body. Could you relax or soften your tongue, the inside of your mouth? The palms of the hands, and the backs of the hands, thumbs and fingers. The belly and the lower back and the buttocks. And the soles of the feet and the heels. Another element is using your anchor as a way of gathering attention. And you might just sense over the next 3 breaths How intimately can you experience your anchor from the inside? Another element is embracing this quality of mindfulness, of non-judging awareness, the sense of the observer. And you might sense, can you widen your awareness to notice what's happening and letting it be? Relaxation, focus, opening to flow. And in these remaining minutes, you might explore yet another quality of practice, which is the capacity to let things be exactly as they are. And you might, if you like, let your anchor drop away. Let any sense of doing fall away. Explore what it means to be, to rest in presence. This alchemy of deep relaxation and alertness. Over this next minute, how much more could you relax or soften or let go? Notice the quality of presence. Sense what may have shifted for you over this practice of gathering, of opening to the here and now. And you might begin to deepen your breath a bit. You might, with your eyes closed, let your head drift a little bit to the left and to the right. Let your body move, stretch in any way that feels right for you. And if you like, you might reach your arms up overhead, stretch out, let out any sounds. Take your time for your transition. It's no hurry. Welcome. I had a particular moment in my life. Of course, life is nothing but moments. But one particular moment stood out for me that I just wanted to share as a kind of an opener for this particular talk. It was a moment when I sat at my desk in my office as, at that time, as president of Kripalu Center. And I had just given notice and worked things out with the board that I was going to be stepping down. I was going to support the transition, find a new CEO, and then be on my way. It was a little bit of a backstory. Previous to that, I had spent 24 years deeply associated with the organization. I kind of stumbled in when I was 25, I think 26 years old, and threw myself into the community. And over those 24 years, I had a celibacy vow, I had a poverty vow, I had an arranged marriage. I worked 6.5 days a week, and tremendously excited about my life, about my inner life with my practices, and also being a force for what I thought was good in the world. I gave myself completely to the organization, and over those years, I was one of the main teachers, and been a spokesperson, done PR, marketing, fundraising, leading retreats, the whole shebang. Totally identified with the place, and here I was moving on. After you've been president of an organization, you got to go. Part of my realization was that I'm not a natural administrator. There was a very, very strong need to fill some gaps, and I stepped in there for a while. We had some tremendous challenges, and I was really kind of at the end of a long line of CEOs who completely burned themselves out trying to run this crazy nonprofit. And I have to admit, in those moments, I was panicking. I had no idea what was next. From a very, very young age, 26 years old, right after I finished my time in the Peace Corps, this was where I grew up. And a question popped into my mind as I was sort of going through my little panic here. And of course, I'd come up with all these different scenarios of what I might do, where I might live, and none of them resonated yet. So really hanging out in the void. And I wondered if I had made a mistake. The question was this: what if you look back in 2 years and realize this is one of the best things that ever happened to you? That question gave me a lot of comfort. And it wasn't 2 years. It was less than that when I realized, wow, this was one of the best things that ever happened to me. Shifting my relationship to that problem, if you will, was really quite dramatic. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that. But I'd like to share first pretty much the punchline of this talk. So once you get the punchline, you can sign off. You don't have to listen to the rest. But it's a quote I'd like to share from Eckhart Tolle. He says this. He says, narrow your life down to this moment. Narrow your life down to this moment. Your life situation may be full of problems. Most life situations are. But find out if you have a problem at this moment. Do you have a problem now? Again, that's pretty much the punchline. So if you do want to stay on, I'm going to talk a little bit about the nature of the moment and the nature of problems and the nature of the self. Specifically, I'd like to talk a little bit about the role of equanimity. Equanimity is one of these exalted qualities, kind of the fruit of practice. It's the sense of steadiness in the midst of change. I'd like to talk about the power of adjusting your attitude as problems arise, and to touch into the root of our problem with problems. And finally, talk a little bit about the nature of the self. That is to say, like, where is the self who actually has a problem? There's a classic story that's been used way too many times in Dharma talks, but I'll just mention it anyway. You may know the story of this farmer who wakes up one morning and he sees that 3 wild horses have just come into his corral. His neighbors say, "Wow, what good fortune." And he says, "Well, good news, bad news, who knows?" His son, who's a robust young man, is trying to break the horses, and he's thrown from one of the horses and he breaks his leg. His neighbors say, "What terrible fortune." And the farmer says, "Well, good news, bad news, who knows?" A little bit later, the army comes through conscripting young men for a big battle, and they passed by his son because of his broken leg. Good news, bad news, who knows? As I've been thinking about an updated version of that story, as we all know, there was a leak that just came out from the Supreme Court indicating that the Supreme Court is going to overturn Roe v. Wade. Now, depending on your point of view, good news, bad news, who knows? From the standpoint of those who want to preserve a woman's right to choose, it sure looks like bad news. On the other hand, perhaps this is a wake-up call. As these rights have been sort of taken for granted, perhaps there'll be some kind of mobilization. Perhaps this will bring in more fundraising for progressive candidates. Perhaps this will change the outcome of the midterm elections. What if we could remember this? Good news, bad news, who knows? I was reminiscing with a friend recently about a biking adventure that I took. Living in West Africa, I met someone who had crossed the Sahara Desert from the north to the south. He stayed with me. He told me about it, all how to do it. And I got very, very psyched. I was living in Niamey in Niger, right in the kind of the Sahel, which is a little bit south of the Sahara. And I got very, very excited about it. And I trained for it, and I took off. I did a short trip to kind of work out the kinks, and essentially starting off on my trip, and I got very sick. There's a hot season happening. It was terrible. The Harmattan winds, dust-laden winds. I got these epic nosebleeds from all the dust getting in my sinuses and breathing all that dust. And when I got really, really sick, and I got a ride back to where he started in the capital city, good news, bad news, who knows? Perhaps it was really good news that I got sick early. What if I had gotten sick in the middle of nowhere? So again, it's a fascinating thing. If you think about a problem, let's say you might want to take a moment. Is there something problematic in your life right now? Just out of all of them, can you just pick one for a moment? When you think about how long you've been tolerating this issue, you might ask yourself, in fact, let's just take a moment to kind of, if you want to amplify the problem, just kind of ask yourself, so all right, what is this like at its worst? When it's really chronic, what's that problem like? And then you might ask a couple of questions, the what if questions. What if this could be a turning point in your life? What if this problem is the motivation you need to make some change? What if this is a teacher calling for your attention? Our attitude around problems is malleable. We actually have some control over that. As the saying goes, it's not necessarily what's happening, it's how you're relating to it becomes an interesting question. And there's a possibility that problems have they all have an element of pain. And there's a brilliant function of pain. Pain is a way of bringing your attention to something. And this is where problems, stress, suffering, pain, become an opportunity. When there's a crisis, there's more awareness about it. There's more consciousness about it. And sometimes more of a willingness to embrace change and adapt. Generally, people are generally indifferent. But when there's a crisis, they're more open to interventions. And we can see this when we look at politics, that there's an issue that's kind of been under the surface and festering for a really long time, and then it blows up as a crisis, and then suddenly there's motivation to put in legislation to deal with it. And an interesting example, you might recall the Deepwater Horizon crisis in 2010. An oil rig exploded and collapsed right in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. 87 days of uncontrolled release of crude oil. There was no technology to contain it. Serious crisis. And what came out of that was a new technology that was completely developed on the fly over just a few months. It's called the capping stick. And with this new technology that had to happen, with all kinds of innovation, experimentation, and intensity, that they came up with this protocol for capping a deep water well that's now a new protocol. And with that new protocol, there's a very, very good chance that could be corrected in the future. And also, because of that crisis, there's a lot more resiliency for the next event. A lot of what happens, and particularly happened here, is that when there's a crisis, it forces a new level of cooperation among rivals. So all of the oil companies were working together to figure out how to fix this. They developed systemic change. They developed dramatic policy shifts. And what comes out of crisis sometimes are the people who really step up to respond to that crisis. So the question becomes, or one of the questions is, what does it take for us to wake up? We end up tolerating a lot of pain and a lot of discomfort because it hasn't reached that threshold where we say, I've had it, this is enough. And, I mentioned this a while back, but it's a fascinating exercise. When I owned my own home way back when, I just had a general sense of malaise. I just sort of didn't like my house. I didn't like my life. And I ran across this thing called making your toleration list. And what you do is you write down everything you're putting up with. And I realized I was overrun by this like death by 1,000 cuts. All these little things that I was just putting up with. And the idea of the toleration list, if you're inspired to try it, is get out a clipboard and write down everything you're putting up with, everything you're tolerating. So I went through every room of my house and I made notes. The screen door that squeaks every time I use it. The closet I tell myself I need to clean out every time I walk by it. On and on and on. I think I had like 50 or 60 of these little niggly things that I was tolerating. And then I took one weekend and kind of like full time, I just started banging stuff out. And I just can't fully describe how amazing it felt to take the time to turn my attention to all these little things I was putting up with. Every time after that, when the screen door would close quietly, there'd be this little rush of happiness. I then instituted something that I call my weekly review, which I've been doing for many, many years, where I go through all of my projects. And the most important thing I get out of this is I decide what I'm not going to do. I basically make a decision I'm not going to do it. So if I decide I'm not going to clean out that closet, I walk by that closet, it's not a problem because I've made a choice that I'm not going to fix it. I'm not going to fix it up. So essentially, in an unexamined life, you're not aware of everything you're putting up with. And the outcome can be kind of this general sense of malaise, a general sense of overwhelm. And one of the things about mindfulness, of course, is we become more aware. We become more aware of what's bugging us, as well as more aware of what gives us joy. And we become more aware of what we're tolerating. And you become more aware of what's under your control and what's not under your control, which is huge. So an interesting study, I was reading this in the Harvard Business Review. They're looking at engineering students. Engineering students are all about solving problems. They have to understand the scope of the problem, generate ideas, evaluate the ideas, come up with solutions. And there are two kinds of thinking. One of them is convergent thinking. This is linear thinking. Okay, if we want to get it done, here are the steps that we need to follow. A, and then B, and then C, and then D. Another quality of thinking is what's called divergent thinking. And this is basically, think of this as brainstorming. It's generating all kinds of possible solutions. And what they find is that when it comes to problem solving, both are really important. But divergent thinking is particularly important if you want to innovate. And it's really what you're doing here, and I find this so interesting, Harvard Business Review, it's training yourself how to defer judgment and how to be courageous. It's training yourself to be more present in the moment, to relax, and to reach a mode of acceptance. Now, what's so fascinating here is convergent thinking is wonderful. It's linear thinking. But training yourself to become more fluid in divergent thinking requires these qualities: deferring judgment, being curious, being present, relaxing, accepting. So what they've discovered is a causal link between mindfulness and divergent thinking. Or we could call it beginner's mind. As Shunryo Suzuki said many, many years ago, in the expert's mind, there are very few possibilities. In the beginner's mind, infinite possibilities. So mindfulness, this capacity to relax, to defer judgment, to be present, to be open and accepting, is a powerful catalyst for innovation. There's some really, really interesting studies. And I find it really curious how, again, when it comes to problematic situations, as I mentioned before, I was involved with Johns Hopkins with their exploration of high-dose psilocybin with long-term meditators. I went through the protocol and kind of helped to kind of talk about how the protocol would be effective for that particular population. And one of the things when you go through the orientation around high-dose psilocybin is what happens when you hit difficulty. And essentially what they say is if something difficult arises, turn toward it. See it as a teacher. It's helpful if you're doing high-dose psilocybin, and it's also helpful in the rest of your life. So another study that was generated was a professor who noticed after she did some Zen training that she noticed that she had some kind of improved skills in kind of conceptual modeling and so forth. Again, back to engineering, which is a very interesting model because engineering is all about convergent thinking. We think, but we're realizing divergent's really important too. So she developed this group, two groups, experimental and control. The first group, first she did this 3 times, 4 weeks and then 6 weeks. And they meditated for 12 minutes a day, 10 to 12 minutes a day. And the technique they did was the body scan and concentration on breath. And afterward, they did these conceptual modeling exercises. Analytical skills, reading comprehension, classifying and organizing concepts. And they measured effectiveness and efficiency. What they found was the meditators were significantly more effective, 10% more effective, and more efficient, 37 to 46% more efficient. This is from 12 minutes a day, body scan, and focusing on an anchor. Calming and seeing more clearly. And this, to me, I just find so fascinating when it comes to working through life's difficulties and working through life's problems. Your capacity for convergent and divergent thinking become enhanced. And now the interesting thing is, what do you see when you're seeing more clearly? What is it that we actually see? Well, one of the things that you see is this play of attachment and letting go, of clinging and release. When I go back to my anxiety, letting go of my whole sense of who I was as president of this organization, I realized for myself that there were a number of things I was attached to. I was attached to the story of who I was in this role and what that meant. I was attached to the security of it, the financial security was really, really nice. And I was really just attached to this whole identity that I had developed over all these years. And I was really not looking forward to letting it all go. What was helpful for me, though, was really pausing and just asking, what am I holding on to? What am I clinging to? And this, of course, it's the nub. It's the nub of it. It's the key. So you might take a moment and reflect on something challenging in your life right now. Let's do this as a short little meditation, if you're up for it. You can close your eyes, maybe take 3 breaths. And you might think of something for you has some kind of inherent dissatisfaction, something you're just not happy with, something that's between you and feeling free. And take a moment just to sense what it's like inside when you think about it. Is there a sense of how this issue is kind of living in your nervous system? And you might just ask yourself, what are you holding on to? What are you hoping for here that's not happening? Where is the clinging? Where is the attachment? And if you would, just take a few moments and sense what it's like to hold on, what it's like to cling. And you might ask yourself now, could you let it go? If you could let it go, would you? And can you imagine what it would feel like if you could let it go just a little bit? And if you like, you can deepen your breath. If you like, you can open your eyes or remain with them closed. This points toward the essence of the practice. And one of the beautiful things about the Buddha's teachings on the Four Noble Truths, or the four essential principles of the practice, is recognizing that stress, dissatisfaction, unsteadiness is part of life. It happens. The second is realizing that there's a cause, and the cause has to do with this clinging, with this identification, attachment. The third is the recognition that you can let go. And the fourth is realizing that there's a path, that there are technologies, there are teachings, there are practices that will support you more and more and more in letting go. What I find really interesting is that some people tend to put most of their attention on the first two. That there's stress and suffering and there's a cause. Some people focus more on the second two. You can let go and there's a path of letting go. And we got to find our balance in there, because sometimes just focusing on the first two gets a little grim. And just focusing on the second two leads to kind of spiritual bypassing and premature transcendence. But seeing the attachment and clinging, so important. Sometimes it's really gross attachment. I don't want to share my ice cream cone with you. Sometimes it's very, very subtle, and that's what I'd like to talk about a little bit, the subtlety of attachment and clinging. It has to do with the sense of I and mine. And this leads to a somewhat esoteric inquiry. It kind of leads a little bit toward the element of premature transcendence, but it's a very, very powerful reframe. There are lots of someone goes to a guru stories out there. I'll tell you one that I ran across. This guy goes to a guru. Guru says, "I'm so glad you found me. You can ask me one question and I will respond as best as I can." A fellow says, "Well, I have this one question that has been plaguing me ever since I took a math class when I was 13. If a train is traveling 70 miles per hour, it leaves from Atlanta at 7 p.m., and another train leaves from Kansas City at 9:45 p.m. Okay. Here's the other one. This one's pretty interesting. This guy goes to a guru, and he's complaining. He's complaining about his family and how they don't listen to him. He's complaining about his job, how it's not really satisfying, how he's been passed over and not acknowledged. He's complaining about the lack of savings for his old age. He's complaining about this issue with his low back and how his feet ache and his digestion isn't so strong. He says, "What do I do with all these problems?" And the guru says, "These are a lot of problems. Now tell me, where is the one who has this problem?" Now, what this points toward is the nature of the self. So I'd like to offer just a short inquiry once again. If you like, you can close your eyes. You might slow down your breath. And as you just sense this body from the inside, you might ask yourself the following question. Where is awareness? Can you locate it? Where is this self? You might deepen your breath a bit. If you like, you can open your eyes. Now that question can be really enervating. But it becomes a very interesting inquiry. Where is the self? Where is awareness? Internal family systems is an incredibly powerful thing to explore. And it identifies some of the parts inside that we're kind of a breakdown of all these different submodalities. There's the child, the parent, the complainer, the controller, the rescuer, the striver, the spiritual warrior, all these different components of this self. But the self itself can be broken down into two components. One is the self that is the result of causes and conditions. That includes your physical body. It includes your psychology, the imprint from your primary caretakers, from your life experiences, from all these different elements that tend to dominate at different times. The controller, the rescuer, the spiritual warrior, all these different components come to the foreground. And yet there's something that is aware of all these parts. There's something about the self that is unconditioned. So we have the conditioned self and the unconditioned self. What happens most of the time is we're identified with that conditioned self. We're identified with the one who's wronged. We're identified with the one who's striving. We're identified with the one who is trying to dominate, or we're identified with the one who's trying to avoid domination from others. That idea of, can you find the one, or can you find the self that has a problem, becomes a very interesting way of kind of like fracturing this world of the conditioned self. What tends to happen is that when we focus on our problems, they pull us in and they make us small. When we can ask these questions, such as, what if, when I look back, this will be one of the best things that ever happened? What if this is a teacher here to unveil some new possibilities to me? What if this is a reminder that I can open the frame of my awareness to look for the good? Then we are dramatically deconstructing these problems, if you will. Someone said that most of the problems in life are because of two reasons. We act without thinking, or we keep thinking without acting. And the challenge and the invitation is to pause, to deeply, deeply slow down, and to look at our life from a wider view. There's a story of a guy who's really frustrated working on his computer, and it was a cold winter's morning, and he texted his wife saying the window's frozen, won't open. She texts back and says, well, gently pour some lukewarm water over it and gently tap the edges with a hammer. 5 minutes later, he says the computer's really messed up now. We have to shift our consciousness in order to solve our problems. So let's close with a short meditation. And we'll kind of explore this in a little bit of a review. As you close your eyes, you might think about this, who you are as the conditioned self. All the different influences in your life. All of your preferences. All of your aversions. Navigating this world of duality with all of its challenges. And you might reflect on how the mind has this tendency to anticipate problems and to review problems. And if you would, slow down your breath and reflect on, again, this quote from Eckhart Tolle. Narrow your life down to this moment. Your life situation may be full of problems. Most life situations are, but find out if you have a problem at this moment. Do you have a problem now? And in these final moments, you might take a moment to kind of reflect on this question of, where is awareness? Can you locate it? Can you sense the play of the conditioned self? Acknowledging everything in your experience that's a product of causes and conditions. And can you imagine it for a moment? The unconditioned self. Oh, unconditioned awareness. Acknowledging your capacity for convergent thinking, for linear thinking, and your capacity for divergent thinking, for opening to infinite possibilities. And can you sense the balance? Awareness wide open, and at the same time, here and now. You might take a moment to reflect on the following question before we close. What is the most important thing in your life right now? And can you imagine this most important thing more fully alive, more fully expressed? Can you imagine this most important thing being cultivated through your capacity to access non-judging awareness? Can you imagine being nurtured by curiosity, through acceptance, through this quality of beginner's mind, as well as your capacity to execute things in real world time? As you're ready, you can gently deepen your breath. As you're ready, you can deepen your breath. I hope this is helpful as we explore the challenges of life. I just find it so critical to remember that we have this quality of steadiness that's available to us. That one thing we do have control over is our attitude, our capacity to look at the root of attachment and clinging, and to let go, and to open to this mystery of accessing unconditioned awareness as a tool for moving toward what's most important. May you and your divergent and convergent thinking have a wonderful experience together. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. Take good care.